Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our Bible study this morning. We're going to be in Ezekiel, as we have been for a while now, and we will be for a while to come. But today we're going to be in chapter 26. It's an interesting chapter, but it's the first of three chapters about Tyre. Chapter 26 is paragraph heading is a prophecy against Tyre. Chapter 27 is a lament over Tyre. And chapter 28 is the ever-popular prophecy against the King of Tyre. And then it'll be followed up in that chapter with the prophecy against Sidon. You'll be especially interested to know what it says about a prophecy against the King of Tyre. But Tyre was a very interesting place. Before we get started, I just want to make a comment. As we read through chapter 26, I want you to notice how many times, don't count them, I mean just notice the occurrence of the word I as it's used. It refers to God, and he will use armies and the sea to accomplish his prophecy. And the reason I want to point that out, I pointed it out many times in our study so far. When we're talking about these prophecies, it's about God doing it. God sent Babylon. He sent an ungodly people as his disciplining rod against Israel or against Judah. And all through these prophecies, particularly today in chapter 26, we're going to see him say, I will do this. I'm going to do that. But the word is I. You will not physically see God do it, but he's going to send someone to do it. And the reason I point this out is because things of the nature of what's going on here naturally occur in the world in times of war and natural disasters. And in a secular world, if somebody were to say God did that, you just get a shrug of a shoulder and say, yeah, right, what are you talking about? How can you even possibly know that? I want us to not be that way. We possibly could be some of those people. Even as Christian people, as Bible-believing people, not want to give God the recognition for him doing what needs to be done for him to accomplish his purposes. He uses the word I in these prophecies, and I want you to realize it is God that did it. He set things in motion for them to occur. He sent so-and-so to do this. He sent the sea and the natural disasters to do that. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I'm saying that just as a reminder because I've said it before. Okay, so let's get right into it. Chapter 26. What do you know about Tyre? Tyre. Tyre means rock. There's two parts to Tyre. Tyre was located in two places. Part of it was on an island offshore, and part of it was about a half a mile offshore, and then part of the city was onshore. And so there was this canal of water that separated the two. Egypt and the Assyrians both sought control of it for its strategic importance as a port city and as a military port. Nebuchadnezzar, and they both tried to conquer it, and they couldn't do it. Nebuchadnezzar continued attempts begun by the Assyrians to conquer the city, to take the city. It took 5 years to subdue the onshore part, which was in 722 BC, and he tried for 13 years, from 587 to 572, to conquer the offshore part, the island part. And he never did it. And it was not until Alexander the Great did it. If you recall, Alexander the Great is 3 powerhouses down from Nebuchadnezzar. You had the Babylonians, was the first world power. Then the Medes and the Persians followed. They conquered the Babylonians, and apparently they never did anything with this, trying to conquer this city. And then Alexander the Great was the next one to come along, and he spent time building a road. He filled in that space. You've got this island out there that was thought to be impregnable. But what Alexander the Great did, he just hauled a bunch of rock out there and filled in that part that was making it an island. So they had a road. They could just march right out there and take the city, and that's exactly what they did. They filled in the water, and all their men, all their chariots, all their horses could march right out there. Until that time, Tyre ranked as a great commercial center whose wealth knew no bounds. It was a very affluent community. Their perceived invincibility led to pride and arrogance that made them insensitive to human suffering. It became all about me. So they would see somebody suffering or some situation, social issues come up, they wouldn't care about that. This lack of concern is illustrated in their malicious joy at the destruction of Jerusalem. We talked about last week we had 4 big prophecies of nations that either helped the Babylonians conquer Israel, or they had malicious intent towards them. They hated them. They cheered when anything bad happened to them, and that sort of thing. And they were punished by God because of it. Tyre was one of those communities, and that's why we're studying them today. So let's get right on into it. Let's look at verses 1 through 6 of chapter 26. Let me read verse 1. In the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Okay, we got one of 3 dates that could be. Apparently last week or a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fall of Jerusalem, and that prophecy came in on such and such a date. Well, we got 3 dates to choose from. Whatever this date is, it could be 423, 587 BC. It could be February 13th, 586 BC, or it could be March 15th of 586 BC. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We know it's a specific date, and we're within the ballpark on one of those 3 dates. Verse 2, Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, aha, pay attention to that. One of the other countries said the same thing. Aha, they cheered. Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, aha, the gate to the nations is broken, and the doors have swung open to me. Now that she lies in ruin, I will prosper. Okay, Tyre. They say, aha. They show animosity towards Israel, and aha is an expression of malicious delight. Ammon was that way back in chapter 25, verse 3. Let me read that again just to kind of remind you of what we said. Chapter 25, verse 3 said this. Say to them, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says, because you, Ammon, because you have said, aha, over my sanctuary when it was desecrated, and over the land of Israel when it was laid waste, and over the people of Judah when they went into exile. Therefore, I am going to give you to the people of the east, so on and so forth. They cheered when all that bad stuff was happening to Jerusalem. Same thing here. Tyre says the same thing. He said, we're going to prosper. They were happy. They They were happy about what happened to Jerusalem, but furthermore, their lands will be available to Tyre because because Judah's going to be gone. They're going to be taken into captivity. The land is going to be there. And Tyre just says, hey, somebody's got to have it. It might as well be us. So, and as they see it, here in verse 2, it says Tyre will prosper because Jerusalem falls. So they're cheering. So they got two reasons. First of all, they didn't even like them, so they cheered when they got beat. And then they cheered because, hey, we can get their land. All right, let me read verses 3 through 6. Well, did I read that? Therefore, because they cheered, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you. Listen to this. This is what's going to happen to them. I will bring many nations against you. There's that word I will bring. It's not God like God's out there leading them, but he says, I'm going to bring them. I'm going to send them. I will bring many nations against you like the sea casting up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble. And now listen to this. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Out of the sea, she will become a place to spread fish nets. Pay attention to that. Out of the sea, she will become a place to spread fish nets. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. She will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. The proliferations of nations coming against Tyre will be unrelenting. It said, notice I will bring many nations. There's going to be one after the other coming in there. It's going to be unrelenting, like the waves of the sea. The waves beat against the seawall. It never stops. It's just one after the other. That's the way the nations are going to be. That's the way Tyre's going to be in receiving these nations. They're going to come in trying to beat them, take them, whip them, one right after the other. It's going to be unrelenting, like the waves of the sea. It just keeps going on by many nations. In verse 4, the city, the walls and the towers, some of this has not been fulfilled until Alexander the Great. It took a while. I told you that the onshore part, the part on the shore, got taken by Nebuchadnezzar, but the offshore part, the part of the island, doesn't get taken until really pretty far into the future from where we're talking about right now. It doesn't happen until Alexander the Great, which I already mentioned to you. It will just be a bare rock after they fall. God will use the nations to do it. He says, I'm going to send many nations. I. And it's going to be unrelenting, like the sea beating against the seawall. All right, let's look at verse 5. I already read it. But that invincible island took so much pride and arrogance, it will be scraped. That invincible island took so much pride and arrogance in what it will be scraped to bare rock, suitable only for spreading out fish nets. It's an island. I guess it's all concrete. It was the concrete jungle at one time. It was just a city was built on it with probably seawalls around it, walls of the city, and so it had a great foundation. It's going to be scraped bare. It's going to be used like a patio to clean your sea net, your fish nets. There will be no trace left of that invincible city built on that island. Notice where the fish nets are spread is out in the sea. Had I not already told you what Alexander the Great did when he conquered that, you would read right past that comment. Out in the sea, it said in verse 5. Yeah, out in the sea, she will become a place to spread fish nets. Out in the sea. Alexander the Great finally conquered the island part by filling in the sea between the island and the shore. So it's not out in the sea anymore. Before that happened, the island was out in the sea. That's what an island is. It's a block of land surrounded by sea. It was out in the sea. But when Alexander got through with it, it wasn't out in the sea anymore. It was connected to the land. So it was what it becomes then. It's like the shore because there's nothing between it and the shore anymore. There's no water. It's all filled in by rock. So that is that's the significance of that comment. It says it was out in the sea. She will become a place to spread his fish nets. All right, verse 6, he goes on to say specifically that the mainland portion of the city will be ravaged by the sword. So that's Nebuchadnezzar's part. His army is going to take down the onshore part pretty easily, I guess. Tyre becomes a byword for pride and self-sufficiency. If you sit around and brag about something, I'm the greatest. I'll win this. Nobody will ever be able to break my record. I will do this. I will do that. I am wonderful. I'm great. I don't need anybody. It's all about me. That's how they were. They were full of pride and arrogance. They lived in an invincible city. They were a commercial force in the world. Everything was going great. They thumbed their nose at the world, but basically, and they get beat. So now they're saying, ha, now they're a byword. So you're the one with the pride and the arrogance, are you? Well, I don't think so anymore. So that's what the byword is. They were so prideful and arrogant because they couldn't hold it against the Babylonians. They become a byword. Okay, let's look at verses 7 through 14. I think this is the details of the immediate destruction of Tyre. Let me read 7 through 14. It's kind of long, but it's interesting. Listen to this. We're not going to talk about a lot of this in detail because it's so obvious, so I want you to hear it as I read it. Starting at verse 7, for this is what the sovereign Lord says. From the north, I'm going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses and chariots. A king of kings. Who have you ever heard of being king of kings before? Think of that. Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's not who this is. Nebuchadnezzar is called King of Kings here. Why? Because he was a world power and he set up kings. He would conquer a nation. He would put his own man in there and he would have a vassal king. It was kind of his man on the inside to do the things that he wanted done. It's not King of Kings like Jesus, who is God. This is just another guy that thinks he's God and wants to act like it. One of the vassal kings, you'll be well aware of, reminded of this when I tell you, Zedekiah was the vassal king. When he conquered Judah, Nebuchadnezzar put his own man in there, who was Zedekiah, and Zedekiah was the guy that decided he was going to act like a king, and he tries to double-cross Nebuchadnezzar. He gets captured, and his whole family is killed before him as he watches, and then his eyes are put out. So that account is readily familiar to you. He was one of the vassal kings. He was one of the kings that made Nebuchadnezzar king of kings. He was just one of the vassal kings. So king of Babylon I'm going to bring nations against Tyre, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses and chariots, with horsemen and a great army. He will ravage your settlements on the mainland with the sword. He will set up siege works against you, build a ramp up to your walls, and raise his shields against you. In verse 9, he will direct the blows of his battering rams against your walls and demolish your towers with his weapons. Can you imagine the terror of being inside that secure place, an invincible place? And here is this man and his army, Nebuchadnezzar, on the outside, beating on the walls, battering on the walls, getting ready to tear them down. There's got to be fear beyond measure in there. His horses will be many, so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots when he enters your gates, as man enters a city whose walls have been broken through. So that's the other thing. It's got to be noisy. That's part of the thing that drives the terror. Just hearing all that noise beating against our secure walls. We know they're coming down. That's the problem. They're coming down. In verse 11, the hooves of his horses will trample all your streets where the walls come down. He will kill your people with the sword, and your strong pillars will fall to the ground. Then in verse 12, they will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. In verse 13 and 14, I will put an end to your noisy songs, and the music of your harps will be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. You will never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Wow. Tyre lasted 13 years against Nebuchadnezzar. This is the onshore part. Nebuchadnezzar is specifically named as the leader who will fulfill this prophecy. Verse 14 even says verse 14 specifically applies to Alexander the Great in the fulfillment and it will never be rebuilt. Let's see, 14 said, I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. So that's the part that we don't see until Alexander comes to do it. Nebuchadnezzar tears down the onshore part. It's never going to be rebuilt again, but he doesn't get to see the part out on the island get torn down, but it's going to be torn down sometime in the future. Verse 7 calls him King of Kings, which I already mentioned. It refers to the many vassal kings that Nebuchadnezzar appointed, like Zedekiah being one example. Okay, and if you look at verses 10 and 11, just notice how terrifying it will be. The walls will tremble at the noise the armies make entering through the city. Hoofs of horses will trample down the streets. So when that wall comes down and the horses come in, those people are going to be in the cities, and they're probably hiding in their houses hoping they don't get found, but they're going to be found because the Bible says their houses are going to be torn down and the people are going to be killed by the sword. So verse 13 says, notice the sadness and finality of judgments. There will be no more songs. There will be no more music. Sounds pretty quiet. What does singing and music usually mean? It means party atmosphere. It means happiness. It means peace, and it means relaxation and that sort of thing. There's not going to be any more of that. Verse 14 says, you will never be rebuilt. Now, let me just say, I can't say that I've read about this, but I can't say I've ever seen it. It is my understanding that even today, the place, that level place, I guess on shore, but specifically out there on the rock that's going to be scraped bare by Alexander the Great, is still a bare rock. Even today, people have seen, I've read about reports, people driving, through the Middle East on tours and whatever, looking out there and seeing fishermen cleaning their nets. It's a nice place. You pull your boat up after a day of fishing. You can get out and, it's a good place to clean up. All right, let's look at verse 15 and 16. This is the effects on the neighbors to Tyre, Tyre's neighbors. Let me read 15 and 16. This is what the sovereign Lord says to Tyre. Will not the coastlands tremble so we're not in the city anymore. This is what's happening around Tyre. Will not the coastlands tremble at the sound of your fall? When the wounded groan and the slaughter takes place in you, then all the princes of the coast will step down from their thrones and lay aside their robes and take off their embroidered garments. Clothed with terror, they will sit on the ground, trembling every moment, appalled at you. The coastlands, it says, the coastlands tremble. You got Tyre, the coastlands are the neighbors, the neighboring communities with their with their kings are going to tremble because they see what's going on. In fact, I think I made a comment about this. I can't really say for sure, but I am pretty sure about it. One of the comments I made when Judah fell, they could see, people of Judah could see the lights of the communities up the coast going out as Nebuchadnezzar was marching down toward them. So the inevitability of it starts to set in with them as they see it happening. That's what happened with these people. They're watching Nebuchadnezzar tear down Tyre, the most indestructible, invincible city in the area. They're watching them tear it down. They're saying, what about us? The vassal kings will take up a lament concerning the fall of Tyre. They will be worrying about themselves. If that can happen to Tyre, the invincible, what about us? All right, let's look at verse 17 and 18. Let me read that. This is their lament, the lament of these kings of the coastland communities. That they will take up a lament concerning you and say to you, how you are destroyed, city of renown, peopled by men of the sea. You were a power on the seas. You and your citizens, you put your terror on all who live there. Now the coastlands tremble on the day of your fall. The islands and the sea are terrified at your collapse. Okay, this is a lament is a funeral dirge. That's what we're looking here. We're talking about the funeral of Tyre. How sad is the lament? In verse 21, we haven't gotten there yet, but it says that Tyre will be sought for protection, but it won't be found. They used to look to Tyre for their protection, and their protection is being torn down. The presence of Tyre has always brought fear of reprisals to the coastlands, the neighboring states, but now, with their absence, there is only fear about what will happen to them. Now there is only fear and uncertainty. All right, let's look at verses 19 to 21. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I make you a desolate city, like cities no longer inhabited, and when I bring the ocean depths over you, here it is, God says, I'm going to do it. A secular world will say, God didn't do that. That's natural upheaval. War happens. God says, I am doing it. I'm sending these people. I am sending ocean depths over you, and its vast waters cover you. Verse 20, then I will bring you down with those who go down to the pit. Here it is, to the people of long ago. I will make you dwell in the earth below as in ancient ruins. What does that sound like? Sound like they've been buried. With those who go down to the pit, and you will not return or take your place in the land of the living. Let me just stop right there. That was verse 20. I stopped with verse 20. We had the lament of the death of Tyre in verses 15 to 18. Now we have the interment of the body into the pit. They're being buried. Verse 19, Tyre will be left desolate and uninhabitable. Remember the rock where the fortress stood to be scraped bare. The invincible is going to be invincible. They're going to be scraped bare. Here the vast waters of the ocean will wash over it. There's not going to be any walls of the city to stop the water from washing over that bare rock. Those waves, when they come crashing in, they're going to wash right over that bare rock. Verse 20, now you will be buried just like everybody else who dies, even those of ancient times and places. No matter how arrogant and prideful you were, you will be buried on death just like everybody else. The pit is synonymous for the grave. Yes, they would have died anyway. Think about that. Even if nothing happened, even if life went on like they always knew it, they were going to die. But this is a different kind of death. This is one that was untimely. It's something they weren't looking for. They thought they would always be invincible. Yes, they would have died anyway, just like we will. But here we see a description of how God's judgment will be used to bring about their death. It's going to be full of terror. Okay, let's look at verse 21, then we'll be done. I will bring you to a horrible end. I hope you see from the comments I've made and what I've read that this is horrible. This is terrible. This is terrifying. It defies their imagination because they were prideful and arrogant and thought that they were invincible. I will bring you to a horrible end, and you will be no more. You will be sought, but you will never again be found, declares the sovereign Lord. What is really bad for Tyre is that death and rest will not be peaceful. They will meet a horrible end, for they will be completely destroyed. They will be sought, but they will never be found again. This is not a good people. I want you to remember that. It's sad for these people because we love people. Christians love people. We don't like seeing things like this, but God brought this about for a reason. He brought it because of judgment. He brought it because of their malice and their hateful and their negative feelings towards Jerusalem and towards him, for that matter. Remember, I've told you before that pride is the biggest sin in the Bible. He said they were prideful and arrogant. They were full of it to the point of thinking they were self-sufficient and they were invincible. That's what this is all about. They were brought to a horrible end. They will never be heard of. They will never be rebuilt again. Okay, next week we'll study chapter 27. It's a lament over Tyre. It's very interesting stuff. Thank you for studying with me.